The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across Main Street like fingers reaching for something they could never quite hold. Hank Dawson sat alone at a metal table outside Ruthie's diner, his weathered hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. The liquid inside had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he hadn't noticed. His thoughts were miles away, years away, decades away, lost in the dusty corners of a past he visited every Tuesday like a man visiting a grave. Hank cut an intimidating figure even in stillness. His leather vest bore the patches and colors of the Iron Wolves insignia that made mothers pull their children closer when he walked past. Silver threads ran through his dark beard and matched the streaks in his hair, which he kept pulled back with a leather cord that had gone dark with age and oil. Deep lines marked his face like a map of hard roads traveled, and a scar along his left jaw caught the light whenever he turned his head, a souvenir from a bar fight in Abilene 20 years ago that he barely remembered and never discussed. His arms were thick as fence posts, the skin beneath layers of faded ink, mapped with old scars that told stories he never shared with anyone. Not anymore, not since the last person who cared enough to ask had packed her bags and left. He took a slow sip of the coffee and grimaced at the cold bitterness. Tuesday afternoons were always quiet in Mapleton, Texas. That was exactly why he chose them for his weekly ritual. Coffee silence and the weight of memories he could not outrun no matter how fast his motorcycle carried him down those long, empty highways that cut through the Texas landscape like sutures on old wounds. He had tried outrunning them. He had opened the throttle on his Harley and let the speedometer climb past numbers that should have scared him, but the wind just carried the memories faster, pressing them against his face like insects against a windshield. More coffee, Hank. Doris, the waitress who had been serving him for nearly 8 years, approached with a fresh pot. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with graying hair pinned back under a hairnet, and the comfortable shoes of someone who spent 10 hours a day on her feet. She was one of the few people in town who did not cross the street when she saw him coming. Time and familiarity had filed down her fear into something closer to fond exasperation, the way a person might feel about a large, occasionally menacing dog who had never actually bitten anyone. "I'm good." His voice was gravel and smoke, the product of years of unfiltered cigarettes that he had given up 8 years ago, along with the whiskey and the pills and everything else that had been slowly killing him in ways he had once welcomed. She nodded and retreated, accustomed to his sparse words. Doris had learned long ago that Hank Dawson was not unfriendly. He was simply a man who had run out of things to say to a world that had taken everything he valued. Hank watched her go, then turned his attention back to the street. The hardware store across the way was putting up 4th of July sale signs, though the holiday was still 2 weeks away. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from the awning in patriotic loops that seemed too cheerful for the mood of the afternoon. A couple walked hand in hand down the sidewalk, leaning into each other as though the world might blow them apart if they let go. The woman laughed at something the man said, and the sound carried across the street to Hank's table, where it landed like a stone dropped into still water. An old dog slept in the shade of the barbershop awning, its ribs rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of a creature that had no appointments to keep and no ghost to outrun. Normal life. Something Hank observed but had not truly participated in for 15 years. He watched it the way a man watches fish in an aquarium, aware that he existed on the other side of glass that could not be broken in a different element entirely breathing different air. His fingers absently traced the faded photograph he kept in his vest pocket, a small worn rectangle that he never showed anyone. He had carried it so long that his body heat had softened the card stock and the edges had gone round and furry with handling. The colors had bled towards sepia, but the image remained clear enough. A little girl in a yellow sundress laughing on a tire swing in the backyard of a house he no longer owned. Blonde curls and catching sunlight like spun gold. Eyes full of a joy so pure it made the world seem simple, made it seem like a place where nothing bad could happen to someone so small and so loved. Some wounds never healed. They just scarred over, leaving tender spots that ached when the weather changed, or when he saw a little girl with blonde pigtails, or heard a certain pitch of laughter that echoed from his past, like a bell that would not stop ringing no matter how far he traveled from the church where it hung. Today marked 15 years. 15 years since Claire. His daughter, his world. The center of a universe that had collapsed into a black hole on a Saturday afternoon when the sun was shining and the road was clear, and he had thought just this once she could ride on the back of his motorcycle around the block. Just once. She had begged him for weeks, pulling at his jeans with her small hands, her eyes wide with the desperate wanting that only children can summon. And he had said yes. Because he loved her. Because saying yes to Claire was the only religion he had ever practiced with any real devotion. The intersection came too fast. The car appeared from nowhere, running the stop sign at a speed that left no room for reaction, no room for the kind of miracle that fathers pray for, in the fraction of a second, between seeing the danger and feeling the impact. He had survived. Claire had not. Hank closed his eyes, feeling the familiar burn behind his eyelids. The colors of his vest might suggest otherwise, but there were kinds of pain even the toughest men could not ride away from. He had tried. God knows he had tried. Whiskey first, then harder things, then the violence that came with the club, the fights that he sought out, not because he enjoyed them, but because physical pain was a temporary distraction from the other kind, the kind that lived in his chest like an animal that had crawled inside and died there, rotting slowly in a place no surgeon could reach. After Claire's death, his marriage had disintegrated with the quiet efficiency of something that had been held together by the presence of a child and could not survive that presence's absence. His wife Sarah had looked at him across the kitchen table one morning, her eyes red from crying and flat with a resignation that was worse than anger, and said the words that sealed his exile from normal life. "I can't look at you without seeing her, and I can't forgive you." She had not said it cruelly. She had said it the way a doctor delivers a terminal diagnosis with sadness and finality, and the unspoken understanding that some things simply cannot be fixed. Hank had not argued. He had watched her pack. He had signed the papers. He had handed over the keys to the house with the tire swing in the backyard and climbed onto his motorcycle and ridden until the gas tank was empty. And then he had pulled into the parking lot of a bar and begun the long, methodical process of trying to drink himself into a grave he felt he deserved. It had taken 8 years to climb out of that grave. 8 years of slow, grinding recovery that had no dramatic turning point, no moment of revelation, just the gradual accumulation of days in which he chose not to die. He had gotten sober not because he found a reason to live, but because he had exhausted every available method of self-destruction, and discovered to his vague disappointment that he was too stubborn to die. His body simply refused to quit, like an engine that kept running on fumes long after the tank was empty. He had settled in Mapleton because it was small enough to be left alone in and far enough from his old life that the memories could not find him easily. He opened a motorcycle repair shop on the edge of town, a corrugated metal building where he spent his days doing the only thing he had ever been truly good at, making broken machines run again. The irony of this was not lost on him. He drained the last of his coffee bitter and cold like the memories themselves. The cup made a dull sound as he set it down on the metal table. A few sparrows pecked at crumbs near his boots, fearless in their smallness. Somewhere down the block a car horn honked twice. Life kept going whether you wanted it to or not. That was maybe the cruelest lesson of all. The world did not pause to acknowledge your grief. It just kept turning, dragging you along like a man tied to the bumper of a car that would not stop. Hank checked his watch, an old scratched Timex that had seen better days. The crystal was cloudy, and the band was held together with a safety pin where the clasp had broken years ago. Almost 4 o'clock. Soon the school buses would arrive, flooding the street with noisy children and watchful parents. That was his cue to leave always. The daily exodus of kids was a reminder he did not need a parade of small faces that were not Claire's and never would be. Each one was a pinprick in a wound that never fully closed. As he reached for his wallet to leave a tip, he always tipped well. One of the few social graces he maintained, something caught his eye. Across the street, partially hidden by a parked delivery truck, stood a small figure. A little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with light brown hair falling in tangles around her shoulders. She wore a pink shirt that seemed 2 sizes too large, the hem hanging past her hips, and jeans, with a flower patch on one knee, that had been sewn on crookedly, as though by someone who was trying but did not quite know how. Her sneakers were scuffed and coming apart at the soles, the kind of shoes that had been worn past their usefulness by a child who did not have another pair waiting in the closet. Hank paused, his hand still in his pocket. Something about her was wrong. She was not playing. She was not moving with the careless bounce of most children her age, that unself-conscious energy that propels small bodies through the world as though gravity is merely a suggestion. Instead, she stood unnaturally still, her shoulders hunched forward, her head constantly turning as if searching for something or someone. Her body language radiated a kind of tension that had no business living inside a child, that small, a coiled alertness that belonged to prey animals and people who had learned to expect danger from the world. His eyes narrowed. Years in the club had taught him to read body language the way most people read street signs automatically and without effort. He could spot trouble before it announced itself, could sense the difference between someone who was lost and someone who was being hunted. The distinction was in the quality of the fear. Lost people looked around with confusion, with the bewildered expression of someone whose map has been taken away. Hunted people looked around with precision, their eyes moving in quick scanning arcs, checking specific locations, watching for specific shapes. This little girl was being hunted. She shifted, stepping partly into the late afternoon sunlight, and Hank could see her face more clearly. Wide eyes darted across the street with the frantic precision of a trapped animal looking for a gap in the fence. Her bottom lip was caught between her teeth, and even from this distance he could see the trembling in her small frame, a vibration that ran through her body like the tremor of a leaf in wind that has not yet arrived but is coming. The girl's gaze swept across the diner patio and locked with his. For a moment neither moved. Something passed between them that transcended age and circumstance, the universal language of those who know what it means to be afraid. Her eyes held his with an intensity that startled him. There was no childish curiosity in that gaze, no playful assessment. She was measuring him, he realized, weighing him, deciding whether the large, scarred, leather-clad man sitting alone with a cold coffee was a threat or a salvation. Hank's hand fell away from his wallet as he watched the little girl look both ways before crossing the street. Her movements were quick and anxious, like a sparrow venturing onto open ground where hawks circled. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her tiny hands balled into fists at her sides, knuckles white beneath the dirt that stained her fingers. Something inside Hank went very still. It was the kind of stillness that came before action and a focusing of senses he had developed over decades of hard living. He sat straighter, his coffee forgotten, every instinct sharpening to a point, like a blade being drawn across a whetstone. The dull fog of memory and regret that usually filled his head burned away in an instant, replaced by a clarity he had not felt in years. The girl reached the sidewalk in front of Ruthie's diner and hesitated. Up close, the signs of neglect were unmistakable. Her hair had not been brushed in days, maybe longer, and there was a faint yellowish bruise on her left arm that could have been from a fall, but sat in the wrong place for that too. High up in the spot where an adult hand might grip too tightly. Dark smudges under her eyes made her look older and younger at the same time, older in their weariness, younger in their vulnerability. A small scar sat above her right eyebrow, faded but visible, and a dusting of freckles crossed her nose like scattered pennies. She spotted him watching her and froze. For a heartbeat, Hank thought she might bolt. Children usually gave him a wide berth pulled away by parents with whispered warnings about the big, scary man with the tattoos and the leather vest. He had grown accustomed to it the way one grows accustomed to weather. It was simply a feature of his existence, like the scars on his hands or the emptiness in his house. But this little girl did not run. Instead, something shifted in her expression. A decision was made behind those honey-colored eyes, a calculation completed, a verdict rendered. Her small chin lifted with a courage that seemed borrowed from someone much larger, someone she might have read about in a book or imagined in a dream, and she walked directly toward his table with the deliberate steps of a person approaching the only door in a burning building. Hank remained motionless, not wanting to frighten her. He had once known how to talk to children a lifetime and a world ago, when his voice had been softer and his hands had known how to braid hair and wipe away tears and build towers out of blocks that were designed to fall down so they could be built again. The girl reached the edge of his table and stopped. She did not speak. Her eyes, large and the color of warm honey with flecks of amber that caught the afternoon light, studied his face with a concentration that felt far older than her years. She looked at his scars, his tattoos, the patches on his vest that bore skulls and wings and words that most people found threatening. None of it seemed to scare her. If anything, she seemed to find something in his battered appearance that reassured her, as though the damage he wore on the outside was proof that he understood something about the world that clean, undamaged people did not. She reached out one small hand and tugged gently at the leather of his vest. The touch was barely there, like a moth landing on a window, but Hank felt it like an electrical current running through his body. No one touched him anymore. Not casually, not deliberately, not at all. He existed in a bubble of physical isolation that he had not chosen but had come to accept as permanent. Certainly no one touched him with such innocent, deliberate trust as though the leather beneath her fingertips were the safest thing in the world. "Sir." Her voice was thin and shaky, just above a whisper like a candle flame that might go out in any breeze. Hank leaned forward carefully, moving with the deliberate slowness of a man approaching something fragile, something that might shatter if he moved too quickly or breathed too hard. "Yes, I need help." She swallowed hard, her throat working visibly beneath the dirty collar of her pink shirt. "Please." The words hung in the warm afternoon air between them like smoke from a fire that had just been lit. Hank glanced around, scanning for a parent, a caretaker, anyone who might belong with this child. The street remained ordinary, unchanged. Doris was wiping down the counter inside the diner. A man walked his dog past the hardware store. The couple had disappeared around the corner, taking their laughter with them. No one was rushing over, calling a name, searching for a missing daughter. "Where's your mom or dad?" he asked, keeping his tone as gentle as a man with his voice could manage, which was roughly equivalent to a piece of sandpaper trying to be silk. The little girl's lower lip trembled. She shook her head once, a quick, jerky movement that communicated everything her words did not. "Not here?" Hank nodded, accepting this without pushing. Years of reading people told him when questions would only build walls higher. Some truths could only be approached sideways, circled slowly, given room to emerge on their own terms. "What's your name?" "Rosie." She whispered it like a secret, her fingers still holding onto his vest as if it were a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in open water. "I'm Rosie." "I'm Hank." He offered his hand without thinking, then wondered if the size of it, the scars across the knuckles from decades of engines and fistfights, the faded ink that spelled out words from another chapter of his life, would frighten her. But Rosie placed her tiny palm against his for just a moment, a gesture of trust so complete and so unearned that it made something catch in Hank's chest. Her hand was cold, despite the Texas heat cold, the way fear makes a body cold, pulling the blood inward to protect the vital organs. "You look strong," she said, searching for words the way a child searches for the right crayon in a box of broken colors. "Like you're not scared of anything." A sad smile touched Hank's lips, the first genuine expression his face had produced in longer than he could remember. If only she knew the things that terrified him. The dark hours before dawn, when Claire's face came to him unbidden, vivid and perfect and unreachable. The empty rooms of his house that echoed with laughter that no longer existed. The bone-deep certainty that he had failed at the one thing that mattered, the only thing that had ever mattered, and that no amount of time or distance or sobriety could undo that failure. "Everyone's scared of something, Rosie." She moved closer, then looking up at him with those solemn, honey-colored eyes that seemed to contain more understanding than any 4-year-old had a right to. "Are you scared of bad men?" The question hit Hank like a fist to the sternum. He felt his pulse quicken, old instincts awakening from years of dormancy, like animals stirring in a den at the first scent of spring. "Did someone hurt you?" Rosie shook her head again, but her eyes darted to the street behind her, quick and sharp. "Not yet." The words came out smaller than before, almost swallowed by the afternoon breeze, carrying with them an implication that made the hair on Hank's arm stand at attention. Hank felt something he had not experienced in 15 years. A protective fury rising in his chest like a fire catching in dry brush, hot and immediate and demanding action. He did not move. He did not let it show on his face. But inside something fundamental shifted. A tectonic plate of emotion grinding against years of numbness, cracking open fault lines that had been dormant so long he had forgotten they existed. "Rosie," he said carefully, "why did you come to me for help?" Her answer was simple and devastating. "You look like the heroes in books, the ones who save people." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, rippling outward through everything he thought he knew about himself. Hank Dawson, who had not felt like anyone's hero in 15 long years, who had not deserved to feel like anyone's hero, who had spent a decade and a half building a life designed specifically around the premise that he was not worthy of anyone's trust, found himself without words. Rosie stepped closer, standing right beside his knee now. She reached up and tugged his vest again, pulling him down toward her with a gentle insistence that brooked no argument. Hank leaned forward, and she cupped her small hand around her mouth as if sharing the most important secret in the world, the kind of secret that changes everything that comes after it. "Sir," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind, "that man is following me." Hank's entire body went rigid. The world around him sharpened into crystal focus with a clarity he had not felt in years, as though someone had wiped a dirty lens and everything suddenly came into resolution. The sounds of the street catalogued themselves automatically. A car engine idling 2 blocks east. The scrape of Doris's rag against the counter inside. A screen door closing at the house on the corner. The position of every person within sight. The man with the dog now rounding the far corner. A teenager on a bicycle pedaling toward the park. A woman loading groceries into a minivan in the lot behind the pharmacy. Exits, obstacles, distance, all processed in an instant by a mind that had spent decades surviving situations where awareness meant the difference between breathing and bleeding. The protective instinct that had stirred moments before now roared fully awake, bringing with it a purpose so clear it burned like white phosphorus in his chest. His eyes narrowed as he straightened one hand, moving automatically to rest on Rosie's small shoulder. The weight of her beneath his palm was almost nothing, a sparrow's worth of bones and breath, but it anchored him to the present moment with a force that surprised him, pulling him out of the past and into a reality that suddenly demanded everything he had. "Which man, Rosie?" His voice was calm, but every syllable carried the steel of a man who had made his living in dangerous company and had not forgotten how. He knelt down to her eye level, his weathered face softening despite the tension coiling through his muscles like a spring being wound. The leather of his vest creaked as he moved a sound that usually made people flinch. Rosie did not flinch. "I'm going to help you, okay?" He kept his voice steady, the way he might speak to a frightened animal caught in a fence, gentle and firm and utterly committed. "Can you show me where this man is without looking directly at him?" Rosie nodded, her honey-colored eyes wide but trusting. The trust in them made something ache in Hank's chest, a sweet, terrible ache that he recognized from another life, as the feeling a person gets when they are handed something precious and fragile and understand that they must not drop it. "Smart girl," he said. He stood slowly wincing as his bad knee protested. Getting old was not kind to a man who had lived hard enough for 3 lifetimes. His knees carried the memory of every fall, every fight, every mile ridden on highways that shook the joints loose over decades. He offered his large calloused hand to Rosie. She hesitated for only a heartbeat before slipping her tiny fingers into his palm. The contrast was stark, almost absurd. Her small hand disappeared into his rough one like a penny dropped into a leather glove. The pale skin of her fingers against the dark, scarred terrain of his palm. Something protective surged through his chest, fierce and primal, an instinct older than thought. "Is there somewhere you feel safe?" he asked, scanning the street with practiced casualness. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging every vehicle, every doorway, every shadow where a man might hide and wait. Rosie pointed with her free hand. "The park. There's a lady who feeds the birds. She's nice to me sometimes." Hank nodded. "Then that's where we'll go. Just walk normal, like we're out for a stroll. Can you do that?" Rosie squeezed his hand and straightened her small shoulders with a determination that made her look like a soldier reporting for duty. A tiny recruit in an oversized pink shirt preparing for a mission she did not fully understand but was willing to attempt because the large man beside her had asked. "I can pretend we're going on an adventure." A ghost of a smile crossed Hank's face, the second one in as many minutes, which was more smiling than he had done in the past month combined. "That's exactly right." They set off down the sidewalk, an unlikely pair that would have stopped traffic in any town in America. The massive biker with his patched leather vest, his scarred face, his arms thick as fence posts, walking with the careful, measured gait of a man escorting a head of state through hostile territory. And beside him, barely reaching his hip, the tiny girl with untied shoelaces and a pink shirt 3 sizes too large, holding his hand with the casual trust of someone who had decided with the absolute certainty that only children possess, that this was where safety lived. Hank adjusted his long stride to match her short steps, shortening his gait, until they moved together at a pace that felt natural, as though they had been walking side by side for years instead of minutes. He kept his posture relaxed, his shoulders loose, projecting the casual confidence of a man who was simply taking his granddaughter for a walk, but his eyes never stopped moving. The streets of Mapleton had never felt so full of potential threat, every alley mouth a possible ambush point, every parked car a potential surveillance position. "Do you live near here, Rosie?" he asked, his voice casual while every sense remained on high alert. "Sometimes," she answered, looking at her feet as they walked, watching the sidewalk cracks pass beneath her scuffed sneakers. "We move a lot." The vague answer set off warning bells in Hank's mind, the kind of bells that once started do not stop ringing until you find the source of the fire. Something was deeply wrong in this child's life, something that went beyond being followed by a stranger on a Tuesday afternoon. The word "sometimes" applied to a home address was not a word that should exist in a 4-year-old's vocabulary. "The park's just around this corner," Hank said. "Tell me about this bird lady." As Rosie chatted about an elderly woman who brought bread crusts for the sparrows every morning and who had once given Rosie a piece of candy wrapped in shiny paper, Hank caught a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision. Someone had stepped out from between 2 buildings across the street, then quickly moved back into the shadows with the smooth, unhurried motion of someone who was not startled but repositioning. The movement was deliberate, controlled, not the casual shift of a pedestrian or the absent-minded weaving of a daydreamer. The calculated repositioning of someone who is tracking a target and adjusting their line of sight. Hank squeezed Rosie's hand gently. "You're doing great," he murmured. "Keep talking about the birds." The park came into view, a modest green space with wooden benches that needed staining swing sets whose chains had gone rusty, and a small pond surrounded by cattails and bordered by a gravel path. Several people were scattered throughout the space like extras in a scene that was about to change genre. A mother pushing a stroller along the gravel path, her attention divided between her phone and the baby inside. 2 teenagers attempting skateboard tricks near the basketball court, their laughter punctuating the afternoon with bursts of reckless joy. An old man reading a newspaper on a bench, his glasses perched on the end of his nose, a thermos of coffee beside him. Hank's eyes swept over each person, assessing threat levels with the efficiency of long practice. The mother was focused on her baby, no threat. The teenagers were absorbed in their skating, no threat. The old man read his paper with the contented stillness of someone who had nowhere else to be. None of them set off alarms, but the hair on the back of his neck was standing at full attention, a sensation he had learned decades ago never to ignore. That feeling had saved his life at least 3 times that he could count, and probably more times that he couldn't. The animal awareness that preceded conscious understanding the way lightning precedes thunder. Someone was watching them. "The bird lady sits by the water usually," Rosie said, tugging him toward the pond with the confident direction of a tour guide. Hank allowed himself to be led while maintaining his vigilance. "Is she here today?" Rosie's face fell as she scanned the benches near the water, her eyes moving from one to the next with the systematic hope of a child looking for a familiar face in a crowd of strangers. "I don't see her." "That's okay," Hank said. "Let's sit for a minute anyway." They settled on a bench with a clear view of the park entrance and the 3 paths leading into the green space. Hank positioned Rosie on the inside of the bench, his body creating a barrier between her and most of the park. It was instinctive automatic, the way a wall positions itself between what it protects and what threatens. He didn't think about it. His body simply knew. "Are you hungry?" he asked, remembering the half-eaten blueberry muffin wrapped in a napkin in his jacket pocket. He had planned to finish it later at the shop, a mid-afternoon snack to carry him through the last few hours of work. Rosie nodded, her eyes lighting up with a brightness that made his chest hurt. The speed and intensity of that brightening told Hank more about her life than any case file could have. He pulled out the slightly squished muffin and handed it to her. She accepted it with both hands, holding it like it was something precious, something that might be taken away if she was not careful enough, if she did not hold on tightly enough, if she made too much noise or drew too much attention. "Thank you," she whispered before taking a small, deliberate bite. She chewed slowly, methodically, as if making each piece last, as if she had learned that food was not guaranteed, and should be savored because you never knew when the next meal would come. Hank watched her eat, his heart aching at how such a simple offering seemed to mean the world to her. While she concentrated on the muffin, he continued his surveillance, cataloging every person in view, noting entrances and exits, measuring distances, building the tactical map in his head that his years with the Iron Wolves had taught him to maintain at all times in unfamiliar territory. That was when he saw him. A man stood partially concealed by an old oak tree near the park's eastern entrance about 40 yards away. Average height, nondescript clothing, the kind of outfit deliberately chosen to be forgettable: brown jacket, khaki pants, a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. Nothing that would catch the eye or stick in the memory. His face was clean-shaven, his hair neatly combed to one side. He looked like someone who sold insurance or managed a bank branch or sat in a cubicle processing forms, the kind of man who existed in the background of other people's lives without leaving an impression. But it was his stillness that betrayed him. While everyone else in the park moved naturally, flowing with the rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon, walking, playing, reading, existing in the uncomplicated way that ordinary people exist, this man remained unnaturally motionless, fixed, rooted, focused entirely on their bench with an intensity that had nothing casual about it, the way a hawk focuses on a mouse in a field patient, and absolute and completely without mercy. Hank tensed his hand instinctively, moving closer to Rosie on the bench. The man's eyes met his for just an instant before sliding away with practiced ease, the deflection so smooth it was almost undetectable. Almost. In that brief flicker of eye contact, Hank recognized something he had seen countless times in his years with the Iron Wolves. The calculated, patient gaze of a predator waiting for its moment. Not the wild, undisciplined look of someone acting on impulse, but the steady, metered attention of someone who had done this before and would do it again, and regarded the act with the same professional detachment that a carpenter might bring to cutting a board. The man began moving away from the tree with deliberate steps, his approach calibrated to look casual. His stride was unhurried, his hands visible, his face arranged in a smile that he wore the way one wears a mask at a party, convincingly enough to pass a casual glance, but not well enough to survive sustained attention. "There you are, sweetheart." The man's voice carried across the park, pitched perfectly between friendly and relieved, hitting exactly the note that a concerned relative would hit if they had been searching for a wandering child. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Beside Hank, Rosie went rigid. Her entire body stiffened as though an electrical current had passed through it, every muscle locking at once in the primal freeze response of an animal that has been spotted by something that intends to eat it. Her small fingers clutched the remaining piece of muffin so tightly that crumbs cascaded onto her lap like snow falling from a branch. She pressed herself against Hank's side, and through the leather of his vest he could feel her trembling, a vibration so fine and so continuous it was like holding a hummingbird. "Uncle Garrett was so worried," the man continued, now just 10 feet away. He held his hands out in a gesture of openness, palms up, the universal body language of someone who wanted to appear harmless. His smile was wide, practiced, and completely empty of warmth, like a window display in a store that has gone out of business. The shapes were right, but there was nothing behind them. Everything about this man felt manufactured. The concerned tone rehearsed until it sounded natural. The friendly posture arranged to project warmth that did not exist. The carefully pressed clothes selected to create the appearance of respectability the way a stage set creates the appearance of a room. It was a costume, Hank realized. A disguise built from ordinary things to simulate the appearance of someone trustworthy, and it was good enough to fool most people, the mother with the stroller, the teenagers, the old man with the newspaper. But not Hank. Hank had spent decades surrounded by dangerous men. He had broken bread with killers, shared roads with men who had done things that the law called crimes and the club called business. He had learned that the most dangerous of all were not the ones who looked dangerous, the ones with the scars and the leather and the tattoos. The most dangerous were the ones who looked the most normal, who wore their camouflage so well that you did not see the teeth until they were already in your throat. "I don't think she wants to go with you," Hank said, his voice low and even, carrying the weight of absolute certainty the way a river carries stones with patient, irresistible force. The man's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, before returning wider and more strained than before, pulled tighter across his face like fabric stretched over a frame that is the wrong size. "She's just upset. We had a little argument this morning about breakfast cereal." He laughed, the sound hollow as an empty barrel rolling down a flight of stairs. "She's been mad at me all day. Come on, Rosie girl, time to go home." Rosie shook her head violently, pressing harder against Hank's side until he could feel the bones of her shoulder against his ribs. Her breaths came in quick, shallow gasps, each one a tiny pant of pure fear. "Strange," Hank said, not moving from the bench. His voice had gone quiet in a way that men who knew him would have recognized as dangerous, the way the air goes quiet before a tornado touches down. "She seemed scared, not angry, when she asked for my help." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, his pleasant mask cracking at the edges like cheap paint in the sun. "I appreciate you looking after her, but she's my responsibility." He held out his hand toward Rosie, palm up, fingers beckoning. "Come on, Rosie, your mom is waiting at home." At this, Rosie's head snapped up. "No, she's not," she whispered. So quietly Hank barely heard her over the sound of the breeze through the cattails. But he heard enough. 3 words that stripped away the last layer of the man's performance and exposed the lie beneath. The man took another step forward. "Thanks for your help, mister, but I'll take it from here." The pretense of friendliness was wearing thin now, the fabric rubbing through to show the coarse material beneath, and what showed was cold and hard and patient, in a way that made Hank's skin prickle. Hank stood. He rose slowly from the bench, unfolding his full height and breadth the way a mountain reveals itself when the clouds lift away from the summit. At 6'3", with shoulders built from decades of wrenching on engines and throwing punches that needed to count. With arms roped with muscle and scarred with history, he cast a shadow that fell across the stranger like a judgment one rendered in a court, from which there was no appeal. His movement placed him squarely between Rosie and the man who called himself her uncle. The geometry was simple. The message was simpler. "Funny thing," Hank said, his voice deceptively calm, a calm that concealed currents strong enough to drown. "She doesn't seem to know you." The park had grown quieter, as though the space itself had become aware that something was happening within its borders that did not belong on a Tuesday afternoon. The mother with the stroller had stopped walking and was watching them, her phone already in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen. The teenagers had paused, their skateboarding, their boards forgotten beneath their feet. Even the old man with the newspaper had lowered it to peer over the top with sharp, attentive eyes that suggested he had seen more of the world than his comfortable bench and thermos of coffee implied. "Listen," the man hissed, stepping closer and dropping his voice to a register intended for Hank's ears alone. "This is a family matter. You don't want to get involved." Hank did not budge. His feet were planted on the ground with the solid permanence of fence posts set in concrete. "She already involved me when she asked for help." The man's pleasant mask slipped, completely falling away like a skin that had been shed, and underneath was something harder, meaner, and desperate. A face that had given up pretending. "Look at yourself." He spat, his eyes traveling over Hank's leather vest, the patches, the tattoos crawling up his forearms like dark vines. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me, a respectable man claiming his niece from some biker thug?" "He's lying." Rosie's voice came from behind Hank, small but clear as a bell, struck in an empty church, cutting through the tension with the pure, uncorrupted authority of truth spoken by someone too young to know how to lie about the things that matter. "I don't have an uncle." The man's face darkened like a storm cloud passing over the sun, his features rearranging themselves into something that was no longer trying to be pleasant or reasonable or anything other than what it was threatening. "Rosie," he warned, and the warmth was gone from his voice entirely, now replaced by something that made the air feel colder, as though a draft had blown in from a place where warmth did not exist. "Don't make this worse. You know what happens when you misbehave." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire that has been burning for a long time in a place you cannot see, confirming everything Hank had suspected from the moment this man opened his mouth. Whatever he wanted with Rosie, it was not family. It was not love or concern or any of the things his performance had tried to simulate. It was something darker, something that lived in the shadows between the words he spoke, and it made Hank's hands curl into fists at his sides. Hank had seen enough broken people in his life to recognize the machinery of predation when it was standing 10 feet away from him wearing khaki pants and a smile that never reached its eyes. "You're not taking her." He stated it simply the way a man states that the sky is blue or the earth is round. Not an opinion, not a threat, a fact as immutable as gravity. He crossed his arms over his chest, and the scars on his knuckles caught the afternoon light like small white stars against the darker terrain of his skin. The man stepped sideways, trying to see around Hank to Rosie. This isn't your business. That child is coming with me one way or another. Hank shifted, maintaining the barrier between them with an economy of motion that spoke of years of experience in situations where positioning was the difference between walking away and being carried. That sounds like a threat. Take it however you want. The man's hand moved toward his jacket pocket, and the movement was not casual. It was the reach of someone who had something in that pocket that changed the mathematics of confrontation, something that tipped the balance of power in a direction that words and sighs could not counter. Around them, the park visitors had begun to react to the escalating tension. Some moved away quickly, gathering children and belongings with the hurried efficiency of people who have learned to recognize the prelude to violence. Others pulled out phones, fingers hovering over screens ready to document or summon help. The mother with the stroller was speaking urgently into her cell, her eyes wide and locked on the two men facing each other across a distance that was shrinking with each passing second. "I've got nowhere to be," Hank replied, his stance widening slightly. His weight settled lower, his center of gravity dropping the way it did when his body prepared itself for what was coming, a physical language he had spoken fluently for 30 years. "And I'm not going anywhere." The man's fingers twitched near his pocket. His eyes darted around the park, counting witnesses, calculating odds, measuring escape routes, running the cold arithmetic of risk and reward that drove every decision in his professional life. When he looked back at Hank, the calculation in his gaze had been replaced by something more dangerous: desperation. The cornered animal look of someone who had invested too much to walk away empty-handed, who had come too far and spent too much time to leave without what he came for. "You have no idea what you're getting into," he snarled, stepping forward until they were nearly chest to chest. Close enough that Hank could smell the artificial mint of his breath and the faint chemical scent of his cologne, and see the cold, empty precision in his pale eyes, eyes that looked at Rosie not as a child, but as a commodity. Hank did not flinch. He had stared down men with guns, with knives, with baseball bats, and broken bottles, and the wild chemical courage of substances that made cowards temporarily brave. He had been shot once in the shoulder and twice in the leg over the course of his years with the Iron Wolves. He had buried friends and fought enemies and lived through nights that should have killed him but didn't because his body had a stubborn, almost spiteful refusal to quit. That had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with a deep, fundamental inability to surrender. This man, with his pressed khakis and his rehearsed smile and whatever small piece of metal he was fingering in his pocket, did not frighten Hank Dawson. What frightened Hank was the small girl behind him trembling against the park bench, trusting him to be the wall between her and the darkness that had been chasing her through streets she should never have had to navigate alone. "Neither do you," Hank said quietly. The man's composure shattered. His hand plunged into his jacket pocket and emerged holding a switchblade that snapped open with a decisive click, a sound that echoed across the suddenly silent park like a gunshot in a cathedral. The afternoon sun caught the blade's edge, turning it into a line of white fire, 3 inches of sharpened steel that glinted with the promise of blood. Hank had been in enough fights to recognize the suspended moment before violence that held breath between thought and action, the instant when the world narrows to a single, irreversible decision. Time did not slow down the way it does in movies. It compressed each fraction of a second, becoming dense with information and consequence packed tight with the awareness of everything that was about to change. He did not hesitate. "Run, Rosie!" he shouted, pushing her behind him as the man lunged forward with the knife leading. The blade sliced through the air where Rosie had been standing a heartbeat earlier, cutting through nothing but empty space and the faint scent of blueberry muffin. Hank blocked the man's arm with his forearm, feeling the sting as the knife caught his leather jacket sleeve and bit into the flesh beneath. Pain flared hot and immediate, a thin line of fire drawn across his skin, but Hank had learned long ago to fight through pain the way a swimmer fights through current by refusing to acknowledge its authority. People scattered. Screams echoed across the park like birds startled from their roosts, sharp cries that rose and fell and rose again. A woman's voice, high and urgent, cut through the chaos. "Someone call the police." The attacker was quicker than Hank had expected. He pivoted on his heel with the fluid grace of someone trained in close-quarters violence and slashed again, the blade whistling through the air in a vicious arc aimed at Hank's throat. Hank ducked under the swing, feeling the displaced air brush the top of his head, and drove his fist into the man's ribs with the full weight of his body behind it. The impact was solid, satisfying a deep thud of bone meeting bone. The kind of punch that should have ended things, should have folded the man in half and dropped him to the ground. The man barely staggered. "You're dead!" he snarled, circling now, his feet moving with the practiced footwork of someone who had used a knife before. This was not his first fight. This was not his first knife. The realization settled into Hank's mind like a stone dropping into deep water. Blood dripped from Hank's forearm onto the concrete path, each drop a small red flower blooming on the gray surface. Behind him, Rosie had taken shelter behind a nearby bench, her eyes enormous with terror, her small body curled into the smallest shape she could manage, as though she could make herself invisible if she just got small enough. Hank kept himself between her and the blade, never letting the attacker shift toward her. His body was a door that would not open, a wall that would not fall. "She's not yours to take," Hank growled, his voice steady despite the fire burning up his arm and the wet warmth spreading beneath his sleeve. The man feinted, left a quick twitch of his shoulders designed to draw a defensive reaction, then stabbed forward with a thrust aimed at Hank's midsection. Hank twisted away, but not fast enough. The blade carved a line across his abdomen, slicing through his shirt and into the skin beneath with a sensation like a zipper being pulled across hot metal. White-hot pain flared across his midsection, and Hank pressed his hand against the wound, feeling the warm wetness spreading beneath his fingers like spilled water. The world sharpened to a razor's edge. Pain had a way of clarifying things, of stripping away everything that did not matter until only the essential remained. And the essential was this: the small girl behind him would not be taken. Not while blood still moved through his veins. Not while his hands could still close into fists. Not while any part of him could still stand between her and what was coming for her. The attacker pulled back, resetting for another strike, and Hank saw his opening. He surged forward, closing the distance before the knife could come up again, taking away the advantage that a blade gives in open space. He grabbed the man's wrist with both hands, his fingers locking around bone and tendon with a grip built from 30 years of wrenching on motorcycle engines, a grip that could twist a stubborn bolt free from rusted housing and was more than capable of holding a human wrist in place. They crashed into a picnic table with the force of two bodies moving at full speed in opposite directions. The bench splintered beneath their combined weight, the wood exploding outward in a shower of fragments. The attacker brought his knee up hard and into Hank's wounded stomach, and stars detonated across his vision, bright and sharp and everywhere. Pain lanced through him in a wave so intense it turned the world white at the edges. His grip loosened for just an instant, and the man wrenched his knife hand free. "Hank!" Rosie's terrified voice cut through the haze of agony like a blade sharper than any knife, sharper than anything the man in the khaki pants could ever hold. The sound of her fear reached into the deepest part of him, the part he had sealed away 15 years ago, when they lowered Claire's small white casket into the ground, and he stood at the edge of the hole and understood that a part of him was going into that earth with her. Something lived in that sealed place, something fierce and primitive and absolutely uncompromising, and the sound of Rosie's voice reached it and pulled it out of the darkness like a rope pulling a survivor from a collapsed mine. Hank straightened despite the agony screaming through his body. A new resolve hardened within him like molten steel, cooling into something unbreakable. The attacker lunged again, knife aimed at Hank's throat. Hank caught his wrist, but the momentum drove them both backward. They hit the ground hard, Hank on his back with the attacker above him, the blade trembling between them inches from his face. Both men strained against each other's strength muscles, burning tendons standing out like cables beneath skin slick with sweat and blood. Hank could feel his own blood soaking into the grass beneath him, warm and sticky, spreading outward in a circle that grew with each passing second. The wound in his stomach burned like a coal pressed against his skin, and his strength was beginning to fade, draining away with the blood that was leaving his body. The knife edge crept closer to his throat, inch by millimeter, relentless as a rising tide. "Should have walked away," the man grunted. His face twisted with effort and hatred, his breath hot against Hank's face. From the corner of his eye, Hank saw Rosie peering from behind the bench. Tears streaming down her face, her small hands pressed against her mouth as though trying to hold in a scream that would shatter the world. Something shifted inside him then, something final and absolute. Not a decision exactly, but something deeper than decision, something that came from the place where fathers live even after their children are gone. He would not let this man take her. Not today. Not ever. With a roar that came from somewhere primal, somewhere beyond muscle and bone, from the place where love lives. After everything else has been stripped away, Hank twisted his hips and drove upward with everything he had left. They rolled. Positions reversed. The attacker's eyes widened in surprise as Hank's shadow fell across him like an eclipse. The knife clattered against the ground as Hank pinned the man's arm with his knee and drove his fist into the man's face with a force that carried the weight of 15 years of guilt of failure, of a desperate and consuming need to finally protect someone who needed him. Once. The man's head snapped to the side. Twice. A split appeared above his eyebrow. Each blow was a statement, a declaration, a refusal to let the darkness win. "Stay down!" Hank growled, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps that tasted of copper. The man bucked and thrashed beneath him. His hand found a rock on the ground, smooth and heavy, and swung it in a wild arc that caught Hank on the temple with a crack that seemed to come from inside his own skull. The world tilted violently sideways. Darkness rushed in from the edges of his vision like curtains closing on a stage. Through a thickening fog, Hank saw the attacker scrambling for the knife. "No!" The word came out as barely a whisper. But the will behind it was absolute, a single syllable that contained everything he was and everything he refused to let happen. Hank forced himself to his knees despite the spinning world. Blood dripped into his eyes from the gash on his temple, painting the world in red. His stomach was a landscape of fire. Every breath was a negotiation with agony. But when he saw the man advancing toward Rosie with the knife, a surge of adrenaline pushed back the darkness with savage, primal force. Claire's face flashed before him, not the way it usually came wreathed in guilt and sorrow, but the way she had looked that last morning, laughing alive, trusting him to keep her safe. He had failed Claire. He would not fail Rosie. With the last reserves of strength his battered body possessed, Hank threw himself forward in a tackle that drove both men to the ground with bone-jarring force. He pinned the attacker face down, one knee pressed into the man's spine, his full weight bearing down. The knife lay knocked aside. The man cursed and thrashed, but Hank held on. Sirens pierced the air, growing louder. Blue lights strobed through the trees. Car doors slammed. Boots pounded on pavement. "Stop! Police! Drop the weapon!" Officers sprinted toward them. The man went still as he realized he was cornered. The metal of handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that echoed across the park. Hank rolled onto his back, spent. The sky pulsed above him. A small face appeared, blocking out the blue. Rosie, tears on her cheeks, small fingers touching his face. "You saved me," she said. Tiny voice, steady as bedrock. An officer knelt beside him, pressing gauze to his stomach. "Ambulance is coming. Hang on." Through fading consciousness, Hank heard the radio chatter. "Suspect matches description from the Amber Alert in Fairview County. Run his prints against the trafficking ring files." A small hand slipped into his. Warm, alive, holding on. The last thing he saw was her face, framed by tangled brown hair in the vast Texas sky, her eyes holding his with a trust he had not earned, but would spend whatever time he had left trying to deserve. For the first time in 15 years he had done something that mattered. The ambulance jostled through the streets, sirens splitting the air. Hank drifted in and out, surfacing into harsh lights and urgent voices. Pain radiated from his stomach. The paramedics worked around him. "BP dropping, 90/60. Push another liter." Through the fog he heard the driver on the radio, the little girl from the park, no next of kin, emergency foster placement being arranged. The words hit harder than any knife. No family, the foster system. "The girl," Hank forced out. "Rosie, where they taking her?" The paramedic's face softened. "She's safe, that's what matters." But it was not enough. Her full name. The radio crackled. Rosie Harper. Age 4, no known relatives. Rosie Harper. Hank repeated the name like a promise. As darkness claimed him, he made a silent vow to 2 girls, one in his memory, one who had just walked into his life. This time he would get it right. Light filtered through Hank's eyelids. Machines beeped. His throat felt like sandpaper. A hospital room, white walls, antiseptic smell. He tried to move and pain exploded through his abdomen. Looking down bandages, IV bruised skin around the needle. Memories returned in flashes. Coffee, small hand on his vest, honey eyes, a knife, blood on grass. "Rosie," he croaked. The nurse came in middle-aged, kind eyes. "Easy, Mr. Dawson. Major surgery. Your spleen took serious damage." "The girl, where's Rosie?" "She's safe. That man is in custody." Hank closed his eyes. Relief, then dread. The ambulance conversation returned. Foster care, no relatives. Where is she now? Emergency foster care, temporary placement. The words settled like stones. The nurse left. Hank stared at the ceiling. Safe for now. But for how long? The next afternoon, a knock. A woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair entered. Behind her, Rosie. Pigtails, butterfly clips, clean yellow shirt. "I'm Evelyn Grant, Child Protective Services. Rosie's been asking about you." Rosie stood at the foot of the bed and eyes traveling over the bandages and tubes. She held a folded construction paper to her chest. "Hey there, kid," Hank said softly. She held out the paper. A tall, dark figure beside a small one. Hearts floating. Me and Hank in wobbly letters. "That's you, and that's me." Hank stared at the drawing. "It's real good, Rosie. Thank you." Over the following days, Rosie visited each morning. She brought a leaf shaped like a star, a joke a nurse taught her, and one morning a worn, stuffed rabbit with one ear. "This is Floppy. He makes me feel better when I'm scared. He can stay with you until you're all better." Hank placed Floppy carefully on his pillow. "Fair deal." They colored together. They talked about birds. And one afternoon Hank told her about Claire. "My daughter liked horse stories, too." "You have a daughter?" "I did. Her name was Claire. She went to heaven a long time ago. My mommy's in heaven, too. Maybe they're friends." For the first time in 15 years, the memories warmed instead of burned. Evelyn came alone the 5th day with her leather portfolio. Rosie's mother, Angela Harper, died of an overdose 8 months ago. No father on the birth certificate. After Angela's death, Rosie was passed between relatives and unstable. The man who attacked you, Garrett Nolan, is part of a trafficking network targeting vulnerable children. He targeted Rosie because she was left unsupervised. So she's got nobody. She'll enter the formal foster system next week. Could be months or years before permanent placement. What would it take to give her something better? What are you asking? I'm asking about giving her a home. My home. Evelyn's eyebrows rose. Background checks, home studies, parenting classes, court hearings, your background will be scrutinized. I've got to record the club, all of it. But I also have a paid-off house, a paid-off shop, 8 years sober, and I know what it means to be alone. Why, you've known her less than a week. Because she trusted me when she had no reason to. Because I had a daughter once, and I made a mistake that cost her everything. Nothing atones for that. But Rosie needs someone, and I'm here. That's just showing up when it matters. I want to be her guardian, whatever it takes. Evelyn reached for her forms. I certainly wasn't expecting this today. The weeks that followed were paperwork evaluations, the grinding machinery of the legal system. Background checks dug through his past, the Iron Wolves, 2 minor arrests, his tax records. He met with the psychologist and told the full story of Claire for the first time. He submitted to a home study. Patricia walked through his small blue house, noting the spare room he had prepared with a twin bed and cloud-patterned curtains. Character references came from unexpected places. Doris, Bill Vargas at the hardware store, Mrs. Patterson next door. Sergeant Mike Delgado, who wrote that in 22 years of law enforcement, he had rarely seen such selfless courage. The court date arrived on a Tuesday. Hank adjusted his tie in the hallway. "Stop fidgeting," Evelyn whispered. "You look presentable." "I look like a biker who lost a bet." Judge Walter Pemberton presided. The prosecutor, Bradley Tate, argued against the motorcycle club lack of child care experience, criminal record. Evelyn countered no violent history, stable home, and income, 8 years sober, strong community references. The judge turned to Hank. "Why should I place this child in your care?" Hank abandoned his rehearsed speech. "I'm not the obvious choice. I'm a 58-year-old mechanic who spent too many years making bad decisions. But I know what it means to be alone. Rosie chose to trust me when the world gave her every reason not to trust anyone. I will protect her with everything I have and everything I am." Dr. Linda Holt, the guardian ad litem, testified that Rosie's bond with Hank was genuine and transformative. Judge Pemberton granted temporary guardianship for 90 days with weekly supervision. In the hallway, Rosie ran to him. "Does this mean I can stay with you?" "Yeah, kid, for now." They walked to the truck together. Hank drove them to the small blue house on Maple Street. "Is it our home now?" Rosie asked. "Yeah, kid, it's our home now." The days filled with small moments that built a family. Scrambled eggs with ketchup, cloud-shaped nightlights, Floppy the one-eared rabbit as trusted advisor, thrift store books read in a rough voice that stumbled over words like fairy and princess, morning teeth brushing supervised by a 4-year-old drill sergeant standing on an overturned milk crate, pancakes that burned on one side. That one's practice. It looks like a monster. Laughter filling a kitchen silent for years. Afternoons at the park. Watch me, Hank. I see you, kid. Evening bird watching on the porch. How do you know so much about birds? My dad taught me. Can you teach me to... Sure thing. He taught her to ride a bicycle. Just keep pedaling. I've got you. She told him about her mother, the singing, the red coat, the sleeping. He told her about Claire, the butterflies, the cartwheels, the hidden cookie crumbs. For the first time, sharing the memories brought warmth instead of pain. Then 3 weeks into their new life, the shadow returned. It was a Thursday evening. Rosie was asleep, Floppy under her arm. Hank sat on the porch in the cooling darkness. The neighborhood was quiet. Mrs. Patterson's windows glowed yellow. A dog barked twice down the block and fell silent. A car pulled slowly down Maple Street. Too slowly. Headlights off. Engine barely audible. It crept past the house and stopped at the curb. Hank sat still in the porch shadows. His hand moved to the baseball bat propped against the wall by the front door. A man stepped out. Shorter, stockier than Garrett Nolan. Dark jacket, quick nervous energy. He walked up the driveway and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at Hank, who sat with the bat across his knees, his scarred face half lit by the window light. "Mr. Dawson, who's asking?" The man smiled without warmth. "I'm a friend of Garrett's. He wanted me to pass along a message. I don't take messages from men who hurt children." The smile thinned. The message is simple. The girl doesn't need to remember too much about what she saw. There's a trial coming up. Things would go smoother for everyone if her memory stayed a little fuzzy. He shrugged. Just something to think about. Hank stood slowly. At his full height, with the bat in his hand and his shadow falling down the steps like a warning made flesh, he occupied space the way a thunderstorm occupies a valley. Here's what I think. You're going to get back in that car and drive away, and you're going to tell whoever sent you that if anyone comes near this house again, or near that little girl, or near anyone she cares about, they will answer to me. And I don't file complaints. I don't call lawyers. I handle things my way. The man stared. His smile was gone. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise, and I always keep my promises. 3 seconds of eye contact. Then the man turned, walked to the car, and drove away without headlights until the end of the block. Hank locked every door and window and called Sergeant Delgado. I just had a visitor. Friend of Nolan's threatening Rosie before the trial. Patrol car on your street within the hour. Come in tomorrow to file a report. Nolan's network doesn't go down easy. For 2 weeks, a police cruiser made regular passes down Maple Street. Hank installed better locks and motion sensor lights. He told Rosie the police car was just neighborhood friends keeping everyone safe. The incident confirmed what he already knew. Rosie's safety required more than locked doors. It required someone who understood threats, who could read danger in a stranger's approach, who would not flinch or back down. She needed him. Then came the afternoon that changed everything again. A Sunday 5 weeks in. Hank in the backyard with the bubble wand. Rosie chasing iridescent spheres across the grass. More Hank, more bubbles. Look, I got one. Good catch, kid. He stood to blow another round. The world tilted. Dizziness swept through him, then the pain-crushing pressure in his chest. Someone squeezing his heart with both hands. Cold sweat. The bubble wand clattered on the patio stones. He reached for the chair, missed, his legs folded. The concrete was rough against his cheek. Hank, get up, please, get up! Small hands pushing his shoulder. Phone, get the phone! Rosie ran inside, returned with this cordless phone. Hank pressed 911. My Hank fell down. He won't get up. Please help him. She recited the address, answered questions, held his hand. Don't go away. Please don't go away like everyone else. Sirens growing louder. Her face the last clear thing before darkness. County General Hospital. Fluorescent lights. Evelyn with Rosie in the waiting room. The doctor spoke quietly in the corridor. The stab wounds had caused complications. Internal bleeding strained his heart. Cardiac event. Serious damage. How bad is weeks, possibly months with treatment? I want you to prepare. Evelyn looked toward the waiting room, where Rosie was showing a nurse her stuffed bear. That little girl just found someone to trust after losing everyone. They found Hank connected to machines. His eyes opened at Rosie's voice. Hey, kid, come here. She held out a drawing, 2 figures, bright sun. I made this for you. It's us. Best picture I've ever gotten. After Rosie fell asleep against his side, Evelyn sat close. How bad? Hank asked. Not good. Your heart took more damage than they realized. How long? Weeks, maybe months. Silence. Then she can't know. Not yet. I need time to make sure she's taken care of after. What do you need me to do? Help me make whatever time I have left count for her. Hank returned home on a Wednesday. Medications made him tired, dizzy. The doctors warned against stress. At home, fear crept in. Small withdrawals. Not looking at things Rosie showed him. Saying he was tired. Building distance to protect her from the pain of his eventual absence. By the 4th day, Rosie had gone quiet. She sat with Floppy watching him with wary confusion. She had seen this before. Adults pulling away, the choreography of abandonment. Evelyn confronted him. You're pushing her away. You know why. Distance isn't kindness, it's just pain delivered early. She's in the next room trying to figure out what she did wrong. Hank gripped the counter. Evelyn left. Small footsteps. Rosie in the doorway. Floppy hanging from one hand. Hank? He turned. Are you going to leave me too? 5 words containing the entire history of a child who expected abandonment from everyone she loved. Something broke inside him. Something deeper than the walls he had built. Something that had been cracked since Claire died and never properly healed. It broke the way bones sometimes break in exactly the right place to finally set properly. He crossed the kitchen and knelt on the floor, eye level with her. No, sweetheart, I am not leaving you. You stopped talking to me. You stopped looking at my pictures. I know, I'm sorry. I was scared and I did a stupid thing. What were you scared of? I was scared of you being sad. I thought staying away would make it hurt less, but that's not how it works. She studied his face, then wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm right here." The next morning he began to plan. He called Ed Buchanan, a lawyer. They sat at the kitchen table while Rosie napped. A trust fund for Rosie, the shop, the house, the motorcycle savings, everything converted into a foundation for a 4-year-old's future. "You're sure? Never been more sure." He asked Evelyn to find the right backup family. She suggested Frank and Diane Prescott, early 50s, childless, a ranch outside town, 11 foster children over the past decade, photographs of returning kids lining the hallway. Hank drove out alone. Frank shook his hand. Diane was direct and warm. "We don't replace the people children have loved," Diane said. "We make room for them. Rosie would know you." "That matters." "We know it does." Driving home, Hank pulled over at the overlook on County Road 7. The entire valley spread below Townfield's water tower. He was preparing for his own absence from a life that had only recently become worth living. It was the bravest thing he had ever done. No fists, no knives, just a pen, a legal document, and the willingness to face the end with his eyes open. The third part of the plan hurt the most. He borrowed a video camera from Bill Vargas. Tuesday evening, after Rosie was asleep, he set it on the kitchen table and pressed record. Long silence. The clock ticking. A moth at the window. "Hey, kid. If you're watching this, it means I couldn't be there today. And I'm sorry, but I want you to know something." Pause. "The day you walked up to me outside that diner was the day my life started again. I'd been dead for 15 years, walking around breathing but dead inside. And you brought me back, a little girl with untied shoes and the bravest heart I've ever seen." He recorded 12 messages, one for each birthday, 5 to 16, first day of school, a day she might feel alone, the day she turned 18. In each he told her something. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more, that the people who hurt you do not define you, that she was never alone. The last message took 3 recordings. "I want you to know that you saved me, Rosie Harper. I thought I was saving you, but it was the other way around. You gave me a reason to be alive again. Every good thing I did after we met I did because you showed me I was still capable of good things." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I love you, kid. I love you the way the sky loves the birds, completely without conditions from the first moment to the last. That love is not going anywhere. It's yours. It was always yours." He turned off the camera and sat in the dark kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum, the house settle, and the soft breathing of a little girl down the hall. 2 weeks later, Garrett Nolan's trial began. 7 victims, 3 counties, a network reaching into neighboring states. Rosie's testimony delivered through closed-circuit video was central. The defense had resources. Lawyers building a narrative of mistaken identity, a concerned family friend, a confused child, an unstable biker. Prosecutor Janet Morrison called Hank to the stand. He wore the blue suit, swore the oath. Answered questions without embellishment. Cross-examination was sharp. History of violence. "I've been in fights a long time ago as the Iron Wolves, a criminal organization. A motorcycle club. Some members had legal troubles. I'm not one of them. You expect this court to believe a man with your background. That child walked up to me because she was terrified. She said a man was following her. Your client claimed to be her uncle. She said she didn't have one. He threatened her. He pulled a knife. I put myself between them." Pause. "The scars on my body tell the story." The jury convicted on all counts. 35 years without parole. 2 accomplices arrested, including the man who had come to Hank's porch with threats about fuzzy memories. Hank got the call on his porch, sunset, painting the sky. "Who was that?" "Just Evelyn. Good news." Rosie leaned against his arm. "I like good news." "Me too, kid." The 90-day review arrived. The courtroom was full. Evelyn, Frank and Diane Prescott, Doris, Bill Vargas, Mrs. Patterson, Sergeant Delgado in dress uniform, Dr. Holt, Prosecutor Tate had a new argument. "Mr. Dawson has been diagnosed with a serious cardiac condition limiting his life expectancy." Judge Pemberton turned to Hank. "Is this accurate?" "It is, Your Honor." "And you still wish to maintain guardianship?" "I do." "Help me understand why." "I've spent 90 days making sure that no matter what happens to me, she will be taken care of. I've established a trust fund. I've identified the Prescotts as secondary guardians. I have recorded messages so she'll have my voice as she grows up." He paused. "I can't promise I'll be here for her 18th birthday, but I can promise that every day I am here I will give her my best, and the day I'm not here she will not be alone." Evelyn testified about Rosie's transformation, withdrawn to vibrant, fearful to trusting. Dr. Holt said removing Rosie would constitute significant trauma. Delgado spoke last. I saw a man with 3 knife wounds pinning a suspect to the ground because a little girl was standing behind him. If that man says he'll take care of that child, I believe him. Judge Pemberton deliberated. The measure of a parent is not how many years they have, but what they do with the years they're given. Permanent guardianship is granted. The Prescott contingency plan is approved. In the hallway, Rosie ran to him. He lifted her despite every protest from his body. Can I stay? You can stay for good. For good. The words held. 6 months passed, summer to autumn to the first chill of a Texas winter. Rosie demanded hot chocolate and extra blankets. Hank's health held. Not improved, but held. Medications kept his heart functioning. He ate what they told him. Rested when told. Took every pill on time because each pill was a bet. On tomorrow, and tomorrow meant another morning with Rosie. He sold the shop to Tommy, his assistant. The money funded the trust. He kept one Harley in the garage under canvas. He did not ride it. Sometimes he sat on the seat and listened to the memory of wind and engine. Rosie started preschool in September. Hank walked her to the door on the first day, her backpack almost bigger than she was. Butterfly clips, purple shirt. Will you be here when I come out? Right here. Same spot. She squared her shoulders and marched inside. He watched through the window as she accepted a crayon and began to draw. She found his face through the glass and smiled. He waited until she was absorbed in her work before walking to the truck. If his eyes were wet, no one was close enough to see. Months accumulated. Mornings for breakfast and the walk to school, afternoons for the park and visits to the Prescott's ranch where Rosie learned to brush a mare named Cinnamon. Evenings for reading Charlotte's Web made them both cry, The Velveteen Rabbit made them cry harder, and a book about training wild horses made Rosie announce her career plans. Good choice, Hank said. Weekends for exploring, the state park where they hiked slowly, the county fair where Hank won her a bear at the ring toss and she won him a goldfish at the ping-pong game. They named the fish Captain. He lived 4 months in a bowl on the kitchen counter before departing for whatever afterlife awaits carnival goldfish. One Saturday at the ranch, Hank watched from the fence as Diane helped Rosie sit on Cinnamon's broad back, terror and delight on her face, small hands gripping the mane. She's a natural, Frank said beside him. Hank watched her fear dissolve into wonder. She's braver than she knows. Kids usually are, until the world teaches them otherwise. Rosie leaned forward and whispered into Cinnamon's ear. The horse's ears flicked. Rosie laughed, bright, ringing a sound that carried across the paddock and settled into Hank's chest like sunlight entering a room that had been dark for too long. She'll be okay, Frank said quietly. Whatever happens. That's what I'm counting on. He recorded a few more video messages during quiet evenings. One for her high school graduation, one for the day she fell in love, one for a bad day when nothing went right. In each, he tried to give her something she could carry, not advice. He did not consider himself qualified for that. Something closer to truth. The things he had learned from a life of mistakes and one great act of grace. Hank still took his medications faithfully. He still rested when his body told him to. He still woke some nights with his heart pounding and his hand reaching across the dark toward a small room down the hall just to reassure himself that the steady breathing he heard was real, that the child sleeping beneath the cloud-patterned curtains was not a dream that would dissolve with the morning light. But increasingly the fear that had gripped him after the diagnosis was losing its hold. Not because the danger had passed, it hadn't, but because the life he was living had grown too full and too vivid to be consumed by what might come. Each day added another layer to the painting, another reason to be present. Another moment that demanded his full attention and received it gladly. The anniversary of the day they met arrived on a Tuesday in late spring. The sun was lower than it had been on that first afternoon outside Ruthie's diner, the light softer, more golden, the kind of light that forgives imperfections and makes even ordinary things look beautiful. Hank sat on the porch with Rosie beside him, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that no crayon could capture, though he knew she would try as she tried everything with the fearless determination that was her defining characteristic. A cardinal sat on the fence, bright as a drop of blood against the weathered wood, its head cocked at an angle that suggested it was either listening to something or judging the quality of the sunset. That's a cardinal, Rosie said, pointing. You taught me that. I did, Hank agreed. She was quiet for a moment, her legs swinging from the porch step, her sneakers new ones properly sized with laces that she could now tie herself, brushing the top of the grass that grew along the base of the steps. Then she looked up at him with the same directness that had characterized her from the very first moment she had appeared beside his table at the diner, that unflinching clarity that saw past surfaces to whatever lived beneath. Hank, yeah, kid. Can I call you something different? Hank's heart, damaged and medicated and beating on borrowed time, seemed to pause. The world around him, the sunset, the cardinal. The warm evening air carrying the scent of cut grass and honeysuckle grew still, as though the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting to hear what would come next. "What did you have in mind?" Rosie's fingers twisted in the hem of her shirt, a nervous habit she had almost outgrown, but which returned in moments of great importance when the words she needed to say were bigger than the voice she had to say them with. "The kids at school talk about their dads," she said, looking down at her lap, then up again, then down, then up, each glance building courage for the next. "And I told them about you, about how you saved me and how we lived together and how you read me stories and make funny pancakes and taught me about birds." She paused, gathering herself for the question the way a diver gathers herself before a jump from a very high place into very deep water. "Can I call you Dad?" The word entered the quiet evening air and hung there shimmering as fragile and as indestructible as a soap bubble caught in the last light of the sun, as simple and as profound as any word in any language. 3 letters that contained the weight of everything she was asking for and everything he wanted to give. Hank looked at this girl. This small, fierce, impossibly brave girl who had walked up to the scariest man on the street and asked for help because she saw something in him that he could not see in himself. Who had called 911 when he collapsed and held his hand while sirens screamed closer and darkness crept in from the edges. Who had offered him her stuffed rabbit because she believed that the things that comforted her could comfort anyone, even a man whose comfort had been broken for 15 years. Who had drawn him picture after picture, each one a small act of love rendered in crayon on construction paper. Each one saying the same thing in a language that needed no words. "You are mine and I am yours, and this is what that looks like." She had taught him that the heart he thought had died with Claire was still beating. Still capable of love so bent and terrifying that it made everything else he had ever felt seem like a rehearsal for something he was only now performing for the first time. His vision blurred. He blinked and something warm tracked down his weathered cheek, following the scar along his jaw like a river following a canyon it had carved over a lifetime of patient, persistent flow. Hank Dawson, who had not cried when he was shot, who had not cried when they buried his brothers, who had not cried even in the dark, terrible days after Claire's funeral when his wife left and the house went empty and the world became a place he merely endured rather than inhabited. Hank Dawson cried now, not from sadness, not from grief, from something he had forgotten existed, a feeling so old and so buried that it had no name, only a sensation. The sensation of a door opening in a wall you thought was solid of light entering a room you thought had no windows, of a hand reaching for yours in darkness and finding it and holding on. "Yeah, kid," he said, and his voice broke open like ground that had been frozen for 15 years, finally thawing in the spring, cracking and shifting and revealing beneath the ice something green and alive and waiting. "You can call me Dad." Rosie climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck, and Hank held her the way he held everything that mattered, carefully, completely, with the full knowledge that nothing lasts forever and the full conviction that some things are worth holding on to anyway. That the impermanence of love is not an argument against love, but the very thing that makes it precious. The way the setting sun is more beautiful than the noon sun precisely because you know it is leaving. He held her and felt her heart beat against his chest, small and fast and alive, a tiny engine running at full speed and his own heart damaged and medicated and uncertain. Beat in response. 2 rhythms finding each other in the gathering dusk. Not quite synchronized, but close enough, close enough. The sun went down behind the rooftops of Maple Street, painting the sky in bands of orange and purple and deep, deep blue. The first stars appeared faint and tentative, as though they were not quite sure they were welcome. The cardinal on the fence sang its evening song, a series of clear descending notes that sounded like someone saying goodbye to the day and meaning it as a compliment. Somewhere in the house the refrigerator hummed its steady accompaniment to a life that was ordinary and extraordinary, and more than either of them had dared to hope for. The crickets began their evening chorus, and the fireflies rose from the grass like sparks from a fire drifting upward into the warm air. Each one a small pulsing light that lasted for a moment, and then went dark, and then lit up again in a different place, a reminder that light is not diminished by darkness, but defined by it. On the kitchen wall, framed in simple wood that Hank had cut and sanded himself one evening while Rosie supervised from her perch on the countertop, hung a drawing done in crayon on construction paper. 2 figures, one tall and one small, holding hands beneath a yellow sun that took up a quarter of the page. 'Cause when you are 4 years old, the sun is that big, the sun is that important. The sun is the largest and most essential thing in the sky. Hearts floated around the figures in various sizes and colors, pink and red and purple, drifting upward like the fireflies outside, filling the crayon sky with love made visible. And at the bottom, in wobbly letters that slanted slightly downhill because the artist's hand was still learning the discipline of straight lines, 5 words that held the weight of the world. Me and Hank forever. Hank Dawson, 58 years old, scarred and battered and running on a heart that the doctor said should not still be working. closed his eyes and breathed in the smell of his daughter's hair in the evening air and the faint lingering sweetness of the bubbles they had blown that afternoon. He breathed it in and held it and let it fill the spaces inside him that had been empty for so long that he had forgotten they were spaces at all, had come to believe they were simply the shape of him, the permanent architecture of a man built from loss. He had been wrong about that, too. He had spent 15 years believing he did not deserve a second chance. He had been wrong. The second chance had not come because he deserved it. It had come because a 4-year-old girl with untied shoes and honey-colored eyes had decided he was worth trusting, and in doing so had given him back the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Not redemption, not forgiveness, not even survival. Purpose. The porch light came on automatically as the darkness deepened, casting a warm circle of gold around the man and the girl who sat together in its glow. Two figures who had found each other in the wreckage of their separate losses, and built from that wreckage something that resembled more closely with each passing day a home. The evening folded around them like a hand closing gently over something precious. Something that had been lost for a very long time and was now against all odds and all expectations found. And in the quiet that followed as the stars brightened and the crickets sang and the world turned slowly toward tomorrow, a man who had once believed he had nothing left to give held a child who had once believed she had no one left to trust, and the holding was enough. The holding was everything. The holding was the whole story told in silence, understood without words complete.